The quaint diner on the corner of Maple and Oak had always been a haven for early risers and night owls. Its checkered floor and chrome-edged counters spoke of a bygone era that Major Thaddeus Quincy Blackwell III found comforting. As he pushed open the glass door, the bell above tinkled, contrasting his somber mood since returning from his last tour. Beside him trotted Zephyr, a proud German shepherd whose intelligent eyes held a lifetime of wisdom. More than a service dog, Zephyr had become Thaddeus's lifeline, keeping nightmares at bay and offering joy during troubled times. "Coffee black as night," Thaddeus murmured to the waitress, his voice gravelly from years of barking orders and inhaling desert sand. Settling into a worn vinyl booth, Zephyr curled up at his feet with a contented sigh. The diner hummed with quiet conversations, a soothing background that nearly lulled Thaddeus into a sense of normalcy. Almost. His calloused fingers drummed an anxious rhythm on the tabletop, a habit to keep his mind in the present. Then he noticed a man whose presence seemed to suck warmth from the room. Laszlo Crispin Thorndyke, the diner's manager, his beady eyes fixed on Thaddeus and Zephyr with undisguised contempt. Laszlo's life was one of squandered potential and bitter resentment. Once a promising business student, he spiraled into addiction and self-loathing. Now at 43, he viewed the world through a cynical lens, each day a battle against his own worst impulses. Thaddeus raised the steaming mug to his lips, savoring the rich aroma, when Laszlo's voice cut through the ambient chatter like a jagged knife. "Hey, old-timer, this ain't no kennel. Get that mutt out of here." Thaddeus turned, fixing Laszlo with a steady gaze that had once cowed hardened soldiers. "Zephyr is a certified service dog," he said, his tone firm. "He has every right to be here." Laszlo's face flushed with rage. "I don't give a damn about your rights," he spat. In a flash, he snatched a heavy wooden cutting board from behind the counter. Time seemed to slow as Thaddeus registered the danger. He moved to shield Zephyr, but he was a fraction too slow. The cutting board connected with a sickening thud, and Zephyr's yelp of pain shattered the morning calm like a gunshot. The diner became a tableau of shock and disbelief. Patrons sat frozen as the reality of what they'd witnessed sank in. Thaddeus knelt on the cold linoleum floor, cradling Zephyr's head in his trembling hands. "Easy, boy," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. But even as he spoke, doubt gnawed at his heart. Laszlo stood rooted to the spot, the cutting board slipping from his grasp. The fog of anger that had clouded his judgment lifted, replaced by dawning horror at what he'd done. I didn't mean to," he stammered, but his words were drowned out by approaching sirens. Within minutes, the diner was awash in red and blue lights. Officers poured in, taking in the scene with grim faces. Among them was Detective Octavia Wren Holloway, known for her compassion for victims. "Major Blackwell," she said softly, kneeling beside the veteran. "We need to get your dog to a vet immediately. There's an animal hospital just 2 blocks from here." Thaddeus nodded numbly, allowing the officers to help him lift Zephyr onto a makeshift stretcher. As they carried the injured dog out, Detective Holloway turned her attention to Laszlo, slumped against the counter, his face ashen. "Mr. Thorndyke, you're under arrest for animal cruelty and assault," she stated, her voice cold as she recited his rights. At the animal hospital, Thaddeus paced the waiting room. Dr. Astrid Faye Nightingale, the lead veterinarian, emerged from the operating room, her expression grave. "Zephyr's injuries are severe," she began. "We're doing everything we can, but you should prepare yourself for the possibility that he might not pull through." Thaddeus felt the world tilt beneath his feet. Zephyr had been more than a service dog. He had been his lifeline. The thought of losing him was unbearable. In the sterile hallways of the animal hospital, surrounded by the beeps of medical equipment, Major Thaddeus Quincy Blackwell III faced a battle unlike any he'd encountered before. A fight for hope, for justice, and for the unbreakable bond between a man and his loyal companion. Days blended into nights as Thaddeus maintained his vigil at the hospital. Dr. Nightingale became a familiar presence, her gentle demeanor a balm to his frayed nerves. "Zephyr's a tough one, just like his owner," she said one evening with a cautious smile. Thaddeus nodded. "He's all I have," he admitted quietly. Meanwhile, across town, Laszlo sat in a holding cell, the gravity of his actions weighing heavily on him. The concrete walls mirrored the prison of addiction and anger he'd built around himself. Detective Holloway stood outside his cell. "Mr. Thorndyke," she began, "this isn't your first run-in with the law." Laszlo looked up, his eyes bloodshot and haunted. "I've made mistakes," he mumbled. "But I never meant to hurt that dog. I just lost control." "Addiction is a powerful force," she replied, "but it's not an excuse for violence. You have a choice now. Continue down this path, or take this as a wake-up call." Her words struck a chord in Laszlo. For the first time in years, he felt a flicker of hope. Back at the hospital, Thaddeus dozed fitfully. He was jolted awake by a soft whine. Blinking away the fog of sleep, he leaned forward. Zephyr's eyes were open, unfocused, but alive. "Doc!" Thaddeus called out, his voice cracking with emotion. Dr. Nightingale rushed in, assessing Zephyr's vital signs. "This is a good sign, Major," she said, barely containing her excitement. "He's not out of the woods yet, but it's a step in the right direction." As Thaddeus gently stroked Zephyr's fur, he felt a surge of determination. They had survived war together. They would survive this too. Meanwhile, Laszlo asked to speak with his court-appointed lawyer, Ezra Phineas Blackstone. "I want to plead guilty," he said, "and I want to get real help this time." Ezra nodded. "That's a brave decision. It won't be easy, but it's the right thing to do." As the wheels of justice began to turn, Thaddeus drew strength from Zephyr's resilience, while Laszlo faced his demons head-on. Both men took their first steps toward a future neither could have imagined. Weeks passed. Zephyr's recovery was slow but steady, each improvement a victory. Dr. Nightingale had become more than just a vet. She was a confidant to Thaddeus, her optimism a beacon in his darkest moments. "He's making remarkable progress," Dr. Nightingale said one afternoon. Thaddeus smiled. "He's always been a fighter," he replied with pride. As Zephyr grew stronger, so did Thaddeus. The cloud of despair lifted, and he opened up about his war experiences and how Zephyr had been his anchor. Meanwhile, Laszlo embarked on his own journey of healing. He committed to a rigorous rehabilitation program under the guidance of counselor Seraphina Jade Hawthorne. Recovery was painful, forcing him to confront deep-seated wounds. "I want to make amends," Laszlo said during a difficult session. "Not just to the dog and its owner, but to everyone I've hurt." As part of his rehabilitation, Laszlo began writing letters to his estranged family, former colleagues, and finally, to Thaddeus and Zephyr. Each letter was an exercise in humility and accountability. One morning, as Thaddeus prepared to take Zephyr for his first walk outside the hospital, Dr. Nightingale approached him with an envelope in hand. "This came for you," she said softly. Thaddeus recognized the return address immediately, County Jail. His hand trembled as he read Laszlo's heartfelt apology. The letter detailed Laszlo's struggles with addiction, his remorse, and his commitment to change. It ended with a request for forgiveness. Thaddeus read the letter twice, then folded it carefully. He looked down at Zephyr, who gazed back with trust. "Should we give him a chance?" Zephyr's tail wagged gently, as if in response. With a newfound capacity for forgiveness, Thaddeus felt ready for the challenges ahead. The courtroom buzzed with tension as Laszlo awaited his sentence. Months had passed since that day at the diner, and he now stood with quiet determination. Judge Prudence Amelia Blackstone gazed down at him. "Your actions were reprehensible," she began, "but this court recognizes your efforts to change." Laszlo stood straight, accepting the sentence. 2 years of probation, mandatory continuation of rehabilitation, and 500 hours of community service at the animal shelter. After the proceedings, Thaddeus approached Laszlo. "I've read your letters," he said. "Zephyr and we're willing to give you that chance." Laszlo's eyes welled with tears as he shook Thaddeus's hand. "Thank you," he whispered. Zephyr took a tentative step towards Laszlo, tail wagging. Detective Holloway, watching nearby, smiled. Moments like these reminded her why she joined the force, not just to serve justice, but to witness growth and forgiveness. In the weeks that followed, Laszlo threw himself into his community service with surprising passion. He found solace in caring for abandoned animals, seeing in their resilience a reflection of his own journey. Thaddeus, inspired by Zephyr's recovery, began volunteering at the VA hospital, helping fellow veterans navigate post-service life. Dr. Nightingale initiated a program at her clinic to pair rescue dogs with veterans in need of companionship. The program, Paws for Heroes, quickly gained traction. One sunny afternoon, nearly a year after the incident, Thaddeus and Zephyr returned to the animal shelter, now as volunteers. As they worked alongside Laszlo to prepare for the shelter's adoption fair, Thaddeus caught sight of Laszlo comforting a skittish dog. He saw not a man who had once lashed out, but a fellow traveler on the road to healing. With Zephyr by his side and a newfound faith in second chances, Major Thaddeus Quincy Blackwell III looked to the future with hope.